Welcome to Paranormal M, where reality meets the unexplainable. Subscribe and hit the notification bell to join us on a quest for answers to the most perplexing stories that challenge our understanding. Why am I being visited? Who are they? Since my childhood, I have had recurring and vivid dreams that I initially thought were just dreams. In these dreams, I encounter 3 silhouetted figures dressed in Native American outfits, each adorned differently. The one in the middle carries a staff, the one on the right holds an orb item, and the one on the left is empty-handed. Their faces remain obscured, appearing only as blurry shadows. These figures would come to my bedside and simply stare at me, without evoking any fear or other emotions. Despite experiencing these dreams frequently, I never shared them with anyone due to the fear of being misunderstood. As I grew older during my high school years, I became curious, and I was determined to figure out whether these experiences were truly dreams or something else. I experimented by moving objects around me before waking up, hoping to observe if they would be remaining in their new positions. However, every time I attempted to reach out to the figures, they would step back, and I would fall into a state of exhaustion, leading to sleep. Now, as a 29-year-old adult with a healthy medical history and a flawless psychological record, essential for my job, it's a serious field, which requires several months of evaluations before I could be employed, I finally mustered the courage to share these experiences with my mom while visiting my hometown. To my surprise, she was left speechless, getting goosebumps in response to my account. She then shared a fascinating story from our family's past. My family hails from Mexico, and I'm a first-generation U.S. citizen. My mom grew up in a poor village near Mexico City, where access to electricity and technology was limited. One night, my grandpa woke up agitated, cursing and screaming, demanding to know who the 4 silhouettes dressed in Native American outfits were and what they wanted from him. In response to his chaos, my mom and her 8 siblings rushed to the living room, witnessing his distress. Grandpa described the figures as 4 silhouettes, one with a staff and 2 with orbs, and one of them empty-handed, all dressed in the same Native American attire. Interestingly, he expressed that he felt peacefulness despite the encounter, a sentiment that resonates with my own experiences. Grandpa revealed that he had seen these figures since he was a child. Remarkably, my mom has never shared this information with me before. He was puzzled as to why the figures appeared as Native Americans, since the Aztecs were predominant in that region of Mexico. Considering our diverse ancestry with the Spanish, French, and Native Mexican Aztec roots, there seems to be no immediate explanation for the connection. To add a curious twist to the story, my parents moved to the U.S. in the 90s, where I was born. Remarkably, the same day I came into this world was a few hours after my grandpa passed away from a heart attack. While I understand that this tale may be difficult to believe for some, I'm genuinely curious about the meaning of these experiences. Lived in a haunted apartment for 12 months. Lots of things happened that I couldn't explain. When I was in my first year out of school, my older brother and I moved into a small 2-story apartment in Scarborough, Western Australia. It was relatively cheap and in a great location, with the only drawback being that the apartment seemed half-finished in places. There were quite a few outdoor areas that were crumbling away, and even some of the walls in the upstairs area had sections of the wall unpainted. We were apparently the first tenants since a renovation. Our parents would come and stay with us from time to time, and we still talk about our weird experiences in that place today. It always had an eerie feeling to it, with random rooms at odd angles and very uncomfortable aura. For want of a better word. The biggest feeling I had at the time was that I always felt like I was going to look down the staircase from the top living area and see someone run past. I don't know why I even thought that, but my parents said that it was one of the first things that I said to them about the place. It all started one Friday night when I was staying home with my mom. We were both sitting on the couch watching TV at about 9 p.m., with only the lampshade and the kitchen light on. We both felt something really odd that I've never felt before or since. Like all of the air was getting sucked out of the room, or there was a pressure change or something similar. We felt like we couldn't move, and it was like we were stuck in place. A shadow then appeared on the wall to the back left of the TV, about the size of a small person, but almost just looked like a blob in a vague shape of a human. It moved diagonally up the wall to the left, as if it was climbing a set of stairs. It then disappeared, and we spent the rest of the night in hysterics, leaving the house until my brother and dad returned a few hours later. What must have been a few weekends later, another encounter occurred. I had just been at the cinemas watching a film with some friends. The film was White Noise, around 2005. And it was based on hearing ghosts speak to you through the static of an untuned radio. It was a pretty average movie, but an interesting idea. That night, while asleep in bed, my clock radio turned on max volume right next to my head at about 1 a.m. It was 10 seconds of chaos as I tried to turn off the radio alarm, but nothing was turning off the sound. In my half-asleep state, I didn't think to pull it off the wall. After about 10 seconds, it finally turned off. I somehow went back to sleep, but I remember at the time knowing that it was the scariest thing that had ever happened to me, and that I had just encountered something. The next morning, I woke up to find the cord for the alarm clock in the middle of the room underneath the bed, nowhere near the wall. Not long after that encounter, we had some friends around for some drinks in our main living room, and had another incident. An old CD player of my brother's was sitting on the table, and turned on max volume all of a sudden, playing with weird Indian sitar-sounding music. Needless to say, it scared the hell out of everyone in the room, if not only because of the loud noise just happening from nowhere. At another point during the night, the sound of a girl's scream came from upstairs, and was eventually explained away by one of my friends as coming from a neighbor's house, even though it felt like it was directly above us. Another instance occurred on an evening when my mom was staying with us, and my brother and dad were away. We had a table tennis in our garage, and that was connected to the house through the laundry. I had fallen asleep on the couch and woke up at 2 a.m. I went to the laundry to have a drink of water from the tap, and I could hear people playing table tennis beyond the door to the garage. I was basically frozen in fear. I put my ear right up to the door, and I could hear the sounds of a game being played, but I knew that myself and Mom were the only ones in the apartment. I retreated and went to bed, knowing that I was too weak to open the door and confront whatever was in there. And I somehow fell asleep. The next morning, I woke up and went downstairs for breakfast. The first thing Mom says to me is, how late were you and your friends up playing table tennis last night?" "I got up to go to the toilet at 3 a.m., and I could hear a game going on in there. So, that was pretty spine-tingling." The last story that I can think of at the moment is when I was at a friend's house one night. I received a phone call from my brother at home. As I answered, he said, "How drunk are you? I can hear you rattling the keys in the door." I explained that I was at a friend's house, to which he replied, "Shit," and hung up. He calls me back 5 minutes later and explained that as soon as he hung up, he heard what sounded like a large animal run along the side of the house from the front along the side fence, and within seconds was knocking aggressively at the back door. He went to the back door, and there was nothing there. Bulgarian Samodivi by my grandmother. This is a story that's been told to me by my grandmother countless times. I finally decided to record it in an audio to transcribe it, also to keep it as a cherished memory for the future. To give you some context, we are in Bulgaria in the early 1900s. My grandmother was not yet born, and what she knows about this story was told to her by her grandfather, who was still quite young at the time of these events. Then I would add that I was also born in Bulgaria, but at an early age I moved to Italy, and I remember little or nothing of the Bulgarian language. So any questions, even for you Bulgarians reading this, ask me in English. I don't have the skills to draw up a decent introduction, so I'll go straight to the story. Smiley face. I missed the village's name, where what you might be going is reading about. These days I will visit my grandmother and I'll ask her, and I'll add it in the comment. One night, many years ago, while I was not yet born, my man was at home on an old cold winter evening. Since his home didn't have an indoor toilet, he had to go outside to pee. He didn't even bother to dress properly, wearing only his woolen socks on his feet, when shortly after 11 o'clock in the evening, he ventured out of bed and approached the door. As soon as he crossed the threshold, he heard a sort of melody and noticed dancing figures, all dressed in white, men and women. These mysterious figures, called Samodives or Samodives, noticed him and the two girls approach him. They grabbed him by the arms and said, "Come with us, we're celebrating a wedding." The man, astonished, asked who they were, and the girls replied, "We are Samodivas. We are celebrating the union of our sister. Now that you have seen us, you must come with us." In a state of enchantment, the man was compelled to go with them, for it was said that once a Samodiva called you, you could not oppose or refuse their invitation. He felt as if in a dream, devoid of will and unable to object, as if he had lost his voice. So, with the Samodivas, he began a long pilgrimage across the country, dancing and celebrating, until he reached Klissura. On their way, they came to an artificial dam, and shortly before, to an open well. Here the Samodivas wondered what to do with the man, whether to throw him into the well or something else. Since he was now so far from home and trapped in their dream world. One of the girls offered the man some wine, but at that moment, a rooster crowing was heard. It was dawn, and the Samodivas immediately disappeared. The man found himself near the well, slowly beginning to wake up from his enchanted state. With the coming of the day, and thus of light, he lowered his eyes to look at the jug of wine that had been offered to him. He realized instead that he had in his hands was a severed head of a fowl, and a white wedding handkerchief. Bewildered and frightened, he decided to take this bizarre evidence of his experience with him to share with the locals. Thus, still wearing his woolen stockings, he began his return journey through the cold and snow. The villagers watched in amazement, wondering where he could have been and what had happened to him. The man divulged his extraordinary story. As some days passed, though, the man lost his mind. But he lived for years before dying. Some speculated that he had lost his mind even before that event, thus raising the question, but where did he find the fowl's head during that strange night? Ask Reddit. Back in the early 2000s, I was working at a medical practice. Our office manager at the time seemed nice enough, but she would sometimes give off a weird vibe, almost like big dick energy. On rainy days, she would wear a fedora and a type of coat that prompted us to nickname her Indiana Jones, behind her back, of course. One day I was sitting at the nurse's station, which shared a wall with the front office. Her office was in the far corner of that area, so she would have to walk past the nurse's station to access the rest of the facility. I was sitting on the far left end of the horseshoe-shaped nurse's station, so my back was to the front office area. There was the usual office chatter, along with the sound of a centrifuge running in the lab across from where I was sitting. Suddenly, I felt a cold chill all over my body, and I felt uneasy. I looked up just as Indiana Jones was walking past to my left side. When I looked up at her, it wasn't her, but rather a dark, almost smoky, opaque silhouette. Of course, my eyes almost popped out, and immediately she returned to normal. But when our eyes met, she had a smirk on her face as if she was saying, "I know you saw the real me." She kept walking, and I started feeling panicky, as though I needed fresh air. I then went to the bathroom to settle my nerves. The second worst part of this completely true story is that one of my coworkers was leaving the bathroom just as I was entering. Apparently, she'd eaten roadkill because her post-bowel movement odor was horrendous, so I immediately went outside to get some fresh air. I heard a voice call out my name in the woods. 16-year-old male. This has a not safe for work warning, just so you guys know. I'm a Nepalese guy living in Norway. A couple of years back when I was 14, there was this trail between my neighborhood and the school I used to go to. It took about 10 minutes to get across it. Covered full of tree branches and a deep valley that you need to climb with a little creek running through it. This one particular autumn day, the leaves were falling off the trees and the temperature was getting lower. It was like 8 degrees Celsius roughly. And this was one time that I experienced this hyper uncomfortable feeling that I was getting watched by something. I don't know how that feeling is unless you've either been hunted or been looked at with strong feelings. I had the feeling that I was being watched, and me being paranoid and curious, and I kind of still am. I took a glance back to where it came from. I saw nothing and I kept walking. I hear someone yell my name, and I look back expecting one of the kids from my neighborhood, wanting to walk with me back home. No, I saw nothing. There was nothing behind me. I even stood there for what felt like a solid minute, but was probably more like 5 to 7 seconds before I bolted it. The problem was, Someone could have been yelling my name as states due to the valley being there, but at the same time the yelling came from this rock a little bit to my right. Whatever was calling my name was behind the big rock. I believe there was a reason our ancestors were wary of the woods. I've heard of skinwalkers and wendigos, or fleshgates, but the problem is, I live in Norway. How could this be? Telemark County, to be specific. Ghost dog. When I was around 5 or 6, my grandma's dog, Bosun, was diagnosed with cancer in his leg. Me and Bosun were best friends. My grandma had him since before it was born, so I spent lots of time with him. And out of all of my siblings, I was the closest to him. My 2 older siblings were scared of him, and my little sister was a baby. Bosun and I always played together and cuddled. He also let me fall asleep on him. He was a large dog, like a Rottweiler and a Great Dane mix. So don't worry, I wasn't squishing him or anything. When I was told about his cancer, I was sad. But I was still young, so in my head, he would be better soon. And it was no less than a stomach bug, perhaps. Obviously, that wasn't the case, and Bosun died a few months later. I was absolutely devastated. Probably the most I've ever been. I remember when I was first told, I ran up to my room, sat crying for hours. It was like that for a few days, but my parents brought me a life-size dog Teddy that I just thought looked just like him. So that helped to calm me down and cheer me up. Naturally, it was a while until my grandma let people stay over again. She was grieving too. But when she did allow people to go over, the weirdest thing happened. I was sitting in the living room watching TV. My granddad was there too. The weather wasn't bad, no wind, no rain. Just bland weather. You may not think this is important, but it is. All of a sudden, the living room door flew open, as if a massive gust of wind has just hit it. But like I said earlier, there was no wind, and the back door, front door, or any of the windows that were in a close area to the door were shut. So it couldn't have been the wind. I also thought that it could have been one of my grand's cats. So I looked down into the hallway. There were no cats, no people, but there was something. It was transparent, but it had color as well. It was the figure of a sitting dog. Not just any dog, it was Bosun, sitting at the end of the hallway, a very faint blue outline surrounding him. I was in shock, and as I looked at Bosun for around 10 seconds, I felt a comforting feeling, but then the door slammed shut again. I didn't want to say anything to my grandparents, as I didn't know if they would be upset, or how they would react to what I had just seen. So when my granddad asked what it was, I said I didn't know, and that it was just really weird. He agreed, and we went back to watching TV. Sleep paralysis plus OBE. OBE stands for out-of-body experience. This happened a few years ago when I was 17. I was a senior in high school at this time. I wasn't on drugs, medication, or alcohol leading up or during this experience. I went to bed late that night. Only my dreams started, and I was on the ceiling looking at my sleeping body below. I saw a dark figure on the side of my bed. It was blacker than the pitch-black room and seemed to be very hairy, furry. I don't know how to quite describe the appearance. Most of it was just a dark blob. but I know it was Harry because it kept reaching over and touching my face. I felt it tickling my face, and my sleeping body would instinctively reach out and touch the spot. It just did. And I could feel it. I could feel the tickling sensation, and I could feel my own hand brushing my face off. It did that for an unknown amount of time. Just reached out, messed with me, retreated, and repeated for presumed hours. But eventually it looked up at me. I could see its eyes and its mouth somehow. I don't recall there ever being a light that showed its face, but I could see it was looking at me on the ceiling. And it was smiling. It then focused back on my unconscious body and sprung onto the bed, its arms swinging wildly as it attacked me. I was dragged down from the ceiling back to my unconscious body and woke up. I was shaking all over. How I would think a seizure would feel like, as if I was vibrating. Of course, when I woke up, the entity was gone. Important to notice, I have a gray cat. He often sleeps with me, right on my chest, or against my neck. That night, he was on the opposite side of the bed in the far corner. When the thing jumped onto the bed, I watched from position on the ceiling that the cat was running away. When I woke up, the cat was gone, which is out of the norm. Not unheard of, but typically the cat wakes up when I would get up in the morning. I would post this elsewhere, but it's important to state later in my waking life. I was out in a state park way too late, around 4 a.m., and I saw the entity across a clearing in another tree line. Again, I could see its face, but I knew it was beaming at me with a smile. I don't know how, but I just knew it was smiling. I've not seen the entity since then. These incidents were only a few weeks apart, too. Just wanted to put this out there. This was about a decade ago when I was a teen. We moved into a trailer out in the backwoods. It had a big tree in the front yard and a crawl space. There was a frequent sound that we would hear from the tree that sounded like rope stretching. It's the only way I could describe the sound. You could hear strange footsteps even when you were alone, and we could see things moving and even thrown around. These were just the normal things in that home. There were bigger events that I would find notable, the first one being when I heard tapping slowly building up all around the trailer, and eventually the roof, and then you could hear goats, despite there being only cows. I eventually started praying until there was a loud sound, and then silence. The next event, which wasn't that big, was weird. It was a picture that my sister took. Everything seemed fine, except we noticed two faces behind my sister, about 1.5 feet from the floor. The faces were very distinct and full of details. My sister had a flip phone around this time, and fortunately the picture was stuck on there, but it creeped out my skeptical parents. Another big event was when my ex was with us for the night. My mom thought she saw her crouched on the couch and was silently moving towards my mom. She saw this feminine shadow shape, and then she looked to the other side of the room and saw my ex asleep. She only spoke of it one time and still doesn't like to talk about it. After this, I saw a large shadow and a very distinct person walking through the reflection in the 2 large mirrors in the living room. The mirror rippled like water as it was walking. Another event. My baby sister began talking to a kitty who sleeps underneath my parents' bed. It seemed like an imaginary friend at first. She said that it was all black with red eyes and had sharp fingers. He would walk up the walls like a spider, and during the day he would sleep in the crawl space. One day she said, "Kitty's awake now." and the crawlspace door began opening and slamming loudly while our dog began barking furiously. This also seemed to line up with the weird scratches that we were all getting at night. Another event is tied to a weird pattern that slowly emerged. Through the 2 years there, we were all getting angrier and psychologically worse. It culminated in my dad cheating on my mom with somebody a little too young, and he left. This led to great depression for everyone. Eventually, my mom said that we would have to move, despite me graduating in a couple of months. As we were packing, I saw a broken mirror in my sister's closet with bloody letters, non-Latin based on the lettering. On them, I heard very heavy stomping, chasing in my direction with some more slamming on the walls. I turned off the last light and locked the door, and that was the last time I stayed there. I left a note in my room for any family unfortunate enough to move in, but I have no idea what happened to the home to be like that. I know a thief lived there and was shot dead by the police, not far from the home, but that's all I could find on the place. I just wanted to share my experience because it feels weird keeping it bottled up. What are your thoughts on that home? Demon encounter. Oh boy, the stories I have. The most recent one was about a year ago. So we live in a 2-story home. That's important for this story. When my husband gets ready for work, he walks up and down, into the restroom, into the closet, and I know the sound of his boots upstairs. So I'm making myself a coffee downstairs, and I can hear him walking and getting ready. After he left for work, I started hearing his boots again in my closet. So I looked out the window. His truck was gone. I went upstairs and, of course, nowhere in sight. I kept it to myself, thinking maybe it was just the house settling or something. This kept happening for a month. Then my daughter and I were living in the living room, and I heard the boots again. I looked at my daughter, hoping I wasn't going crazy, and she had heard them too. She looked at me and asks, "Is Dad still here?" I'm like, "No, you heard that too?" Then I went on to tell her all the times I'd been hearing someone walking. Now, my daughter is a medium, even though she doesn't want to use her gifts. I asked her, "Can you please use your gift to help me cast this thing away?" She immediately said yes. So we went on checking every nook and cranny, all the rooms, mine being the last one. We go one by one, and she's like, "Nope, nothing here or here," and so on and so forth. When we went into my room, she stopped. She said, "I feel something really bad in here." She pointed at my bed, on my side, then said, "It's in the closet." We walk into the closet, and my daughter starts crying hysterically, and her face shifted into fear I'd never seen on anyone. Mind you, this was the first time she's actually confronted anything with her gifts. I helped her calm down, and before we decided to cast it out, we prayed so that God would protect us and cover us with His presence and His precious blood. Once those prayers were done, the war began. We prayed and cast that thing back to where it came from, and I could feel it fighting, and she could see it laughing. When my daughter told me he was laughing, I got so mad and prayed harder. She then said, "It looks scared, Mom." I'm like, "He should be, because we have the power of God." Eventually, he left. We felt such a relief, and my daughter's face changed back to peacefulness. Ask Reddit. When I was living with one of my brothers, but still felt too awkward to have sex with my then girlfriend at the house, we would go to my mom's house, because it was pretty much empty except for my bedroom stuff that I couldn't fit at my brother's house. We were leaving one night, and once we got in the car, she said that she saw a kid standing in the room across from the bathroom on her way out. Pretty creepy, but what's even more creepy is what my other brother said when I told him about it. He lived there for a little while after we had all moved out, and he said he had come face to face with a kid standing in the doorway of that room, and that was when he got out of the shower one day. That was also his room growing up. And he also said that he would wake up sometimes to something breathing and walking around his bed. I never saw the kid in that house, but my drum set was in that room for like a day. The one time I went to play it in that room, about 5 minutes after I started, I suddenly felt like someone was standing right behind me, very menacingly, and wanted me to leave. So that's exactly what I did. Never played music in that room again. I have other stories about that house, but those are the most notable that happened to me. When I was left home alone, I'd hear thumps, noises, and feel a horrible presence, to the point that I would cry and scream for my parents. I couldn't move off of the sofa and enjoy any time that I had alone, mainly because it felt like I wasn't actually alone. I heard someone crawling on all fours down the stairs, stomping near the pet cages, walking around our bedrooms. It was disgusting. And I'd still have to recover for about half an hour when my family got back each time. One time it turned my radio on and started playing a very specific song that I'd never heard before. I used to question it. Was it friendly? Was it a person? Or at least shaped like one? Was it going to peek around the corner and stare at me? At one point I even thought that it was a man, a toddler or a mutated child my age that was just using her house as a hiding spot. One evening my nose just started frantically bleeding. Being the weird kid, I was left with a handprint on the wall from it, next to the cupboard. I highly suspected the thing would sort of use that as a hiding spot. Decorative purposes, I honestly couldn't tell you. What I can say, though, is that I wasn't expecting another one to appear next to it about a week or so later. It was also in blood, way smaller, but in blood. That's when I kind of thought that there could actually be someone or something stalking me. I've always wondered if it was a specific spirit or a curse, but to no avail. Neither of the handprints were mentioned. I tried to show it to my sister, who was convinced that she did it, but her hand was far too small. Whatever it was, I hope it's not watching me now. Ask Reddit. The only thing close to a paranormal activity that I've had was about 2 months ago. I've been living in this house for 6 months, and my bedroom door doesn't fully close, so it's always ajar at night, or about as closed as I can get it. I was watching something on my TV in the middle of the night, and suddenly my door opens halfway. I assumed it was my cat, but when I looked, it looked like there was something standing there. My eyes were adjusting, and I was just looking at its face, expecting to hear my mom's voice saying something like, "Why are you still up?" But after about 5 seconds, the figure faded away. I was pretty confused and scared, and I wasn't really sure what to believe. So I got up to try to see. Maybe my cat was still in the room, but she wasn't. I found her out in the living room, curled up and fast asleep. There was no way my door could have just opened because all the windows were shut, so there couldn't have been a draft. I'm still not exactly sure what it is that I saw. My mom also had an experience in this house. She was tidying up a bit around the house, and apparently the corner of the big rug flipped over. Same thing, no windows or doors open. She also assumed it was the cat, as she likes to play with the rug corners for some reason, but my cat was with me. Something followed my friend up to the mountaintop. This didn't happen to me, but to a friend who went hiking to Mount Lawu in Java, Indonesia. Mount Lawu is considered a sacred place by the locals, and people believe it is one of, if not the most haunted mountain in Java. Most people have gotten lost up there, and some have never been found. One case in particular, which I recall, is the disappearance of a young boy named Alvin, who went hiking up there with some of his friends on New Year's Eve a few years ago. He vanished without a trace. The rescue party gave up after weeks of combing the slopes trying to find him. He was last seen by other hikers near Pasar Diang and Pasar Satan, Diang Market or Devil's Market, an empty grassland near the top where many hikers have reported hearing mysterious disembodied voices, hence the name. A few years ago, my friend and 2 other hikers decided to climb the mountain. There are several marked trails by which to get to the top of Mount Lawu. The busiest one is Kandi Shito, because it's one of the easier trails to pick up and the scenery up there is breathtaking. But the ascent takes longer. It's a footpath that gradually ascends through pine forests, grasslands, and whatnot. He and 2 rookie-through hikers took this trail. It was his first climb to the top of Mount Lawu. They had met on a hiker forum months before and decided to take the easier trail since the other 2 guys had never attempted a mountain of this caliber before. It wasn't one of those busy days when they arrived, and there were only a handful of other hikers around. Anyway, their trip went smoothly at first. Soon they were joined by 2 other hikers from a nearby city. But after they broke through the thicket and passed through Pasar Diang, my friend began to feel a little bit uneased. And then he noticed something a little off with their hiking group. There were now 6 of them. Somebody else had joined them unnoticed. He looked around and stared at his fellow hikers one by one, and nothing seemed out of the ordinary. They all looked familiar to him, which was confusing. He couldn't seem to recognize the odd one out, no matter how many times he counted and scrutinized their faces. And to make it even worse, he seemed to be the only one who had noticed this. He asked himself if he was becoming disoriented due to exhaustion or the cold. He started seeing glimpses of blurry silhouettes moving around them. He wanted to quit. He no longer felt excited about this hike. He didn't feel like he was going to make it another hour. But there was nothing he could do. They were already halfway to the top, and he was sure that he had no choice but to return alone if he decided to turn back. He had lost his bearings, you could say. He had no idea where he was or who he was with. When they finally reached the top, he collapsed in a heap. According to his friends, he then became delirious and started to speak of random creepy things like them being followed by something, or someone watching them in the fog. He even told them to just leave him there because he was going to die anyway, and let his parents know how much he missed and loved them. It took them a few hours to calm him down and for him to regain his strength, and they decided to set up camp for the night. But the other guys also couldn't sleep. They could feel a presence with them. When the first lights of day appeared in the sky, they quickly dismantled the tents, packed him away and began their descent, which luckily only took a few hours down the slope until they made it safely to base camp. My friend had to be rushed to the hospital, burning up with a fever. He had made it through the night and down the mountain. Others like him weren't so lucky. Does anyone know anything about friendly or passive spirits? My old house was really creepy. I could go on about the experiences I've had. I'd be happy to tell some in the comments, but I want to focus on a few experiences in particular. I used to see shadow people all of the time, between the ages of 4 and 6, very frequently. My siblings also reported them at the time, and we all stopped seeing them around the same time. I believe in spirits. However, I can agree that some experiences can easily be explained away. For example, a lot of shadow people can be explained through either sleep paralysis, which is being frozen, or the feeling of dread and fear that you get around them, or just a trick of the eye, in the way most people report them, disappearing in a split second. But my shadow people were different. I remember they'd always be around in the landing space between 2 staircases in my house. They were really tall, having to bend their necks to fit under the roof. Elongated arms and legs and fingers like a shadow, they were black and see-through. One of my most vivid memories is me running up the stairs when I realized that they were literally all crowded on the landing. I'm talking 10 to 15 of these things. They turned to me and sort of just stepped aside to give me room to go upstairs. They looked a bit shocked that I could see them. I wasn't scared, more just wary. The other time I think is more compelling. I was like 4 or 5 maybe, and I was coloring at her art table. I got this strong feeling somebody was behind me watching me. So strong I actually thought it was my mom. So I turned around to talk to her, and it wasn't her. It was a shadow person watching me draw intently. It was kind of bent over like how a parent or teacher watches a kid play. It was a bit parental, and I wasn't scared, more just confused, so I turned around and started drawing again. It's just weird since most reports of shadow people have them either disappearing or just peek out at you, or have them bring intense fear to you, which these things didn't. I have a question on how to deal with this. I have what I call the stalker, a being that follows me throughout my house late at night, and lately it's turned sinister. When it manifests, I feel like something is afoot behind me, like following while watching me. Usually, I just run to my room and burn sage to rid the feeling, but this time was different. I went downstairs to make popcorn, and he manifested outside my room as I left. Due to the last incident, I didn't pay it much attention, but it did freak me out. When I came back up with my food and needed to turn off the lights, the feel of unease turned to immense danger the moment I turned the lights off, and I quickly shut my door and burned sage. The other spirits, even one that's mischievous in my house, have all run to my room where they know it's safest. I don't know how to keep the stalker out or how to get rid of it. How to get rid of it from this house. I'm not the only person who's felt its presence. My brother also froze due to his presence and then texted me repeatedly. Come in the game room now, please. How do I rid this thing from my home? .650 Old Hull Road. Not safe for work. I warned you. Let me start by saying I'm not a skeptic, but I wasn't much of a believer either. That is, until I had worked at 650 Old Hull Road. It's a building the company I work for had rented for an extra room of our Walmart holiday candy orders. The first night there was an ordinary night. We started setting up for the day shift orders and pulling things that were, just to get ready, and they were going smoothly. The second night is when things started to get strange. The second night, while I was working, I smelled the scent of woman's perfume, which was weird because there were no women working with us on the night shift. After I smelled the perfume, I started hearing whispers, like the ones in the second Ouija movie. But I just said to myself that it just must be homeless people that walk the railroad tracks at night. Then I thought, if that were true, how could I hear them inside? The building's walls were made of 5-inch thick bricks, and I remember the train rolling by. Which brings me to the third night, when I locked myself out of the building. Yeah, I did that. Like I said, I locked myself out of the building. Since I couldn't get back in, I went to lunch. Now there's a side door that we use for truck drivers to go in and out. There was no outside, no handle on it, so if it shuts, someone has to let you in from the inside. And that's kind of how I got locked out. I went outside to throw out some trash. Now the door did have a latch that holds the door open, but the second I turned my back, the door slammed shut. Honestly, it damn near scared the shit out of me. That's how I got locked out. So I drove to the nearby McDonald's, got me something to eat, headed back to the 650. That's what we all called the building for short. Once I got back, I see the side door from the parking lot, and that sucker was wide open. The latch was locked, and I'm standing there scratching my head. Which brings me to the fourth night. The fourth night is when the lights on one specific aisle started flickering. One by one, the lights would flicker off and on, like someone or something was walking down the aisle. When the last light went off, once it came on, so did one of the building's heaters. When the heater lights up, it looked like 10 eyes staring down at me. That's also the night I saw it. I don't know what it was, but it had a man's body and its head didn't look human. After I saw that, I was never a skeptic again. What's in my house? My husband and I moved into this house almost 3 years ago now. And in that time, there have been only 2 very strange occurrences. And weirdly enough, I didn't connect the 2 until now. Now I'm wondering, is there something here? Is there a name for this thing? The first incident happened around 2.5 years ago, I believe. It was shortly after we moved in. I actually posted about this on Glitch, the Matrix sub at the time. The way our house is laid out, it's a semi-open concept, where you have to come down a hallway from the front area into the kitchen and living room area, which occupies the same space. But there's a wall that partially obscures one side of the living room if you're in the kitchen. So I was cooking dinner, and my dog was lying at my feet, hoping for me to drop some food. My husband came down the hallway and went around the corner into the living room without saying a word, and my dog got up and followed him into the living room. I started talking about some work gossip while I cooked, basically droning on for a bit with no response from my husband for several minutes. When I put the food into the oven to cook, I went to the living room, planning to sit down with him and wait. Except when I stepped around the wall, he wasn't there. Our dog was on the couch alone. A second later, I heard the basement door open. It's a noisy door, so there's no way that he got up and went down while I was talking to him. Also, it would have been impossible for me not to see him go, since he would have had to walk back through the kitchen to go literally anywhere else in the house. He comes into the living room, and I immediately asked if he had just been in here a minute ago. He looked genuinely confused and said he had been playing video games in the basement for over an hour. It was creepy and unsettling, but we both just kind of shrugged it off and embraced the spooky story as one to tell friends who came over to visit. Then the second thing happened. This was maybe 6 months ago, so about 2 years since the first. I tend to sort of startle awake from dreams and then be fully awake. So, I jolted awake and it was still dark out, but early morning. We have 2 dogs now and they sleep in the corner of our bedroom. My back was to them and I heard my husband's voice clear as day, unmistakable, in a very quiet whisper praising the dogs. Saying things like, "You're such a good boy, and I love you so much." This is 100% in character for him, so I didn't think much of it. I just rolled over towards the sound, about to tell him that I thought he was sweet. But when I rolled over, he wasn't there. He wasn't in the bedroom at all. It was just me and the dogs in the dark. I couldn't tell if the dogs were awake, but they were lying down calmly. The fact that this thing keeps impersonating my husband freaks me out. What could it be? It doesn't scare the dogs, and it's never done anything other than just be there. Should I be worried? I think my job is haunted. Help. My first experience was on New Year's Eve at a job party with myself, a female 20 years old, and a few coworkers. Only me and my coworker Kayla's sister heard the sound of a large metal object clashing. We went to look. Nothing was out of place. This was the earliest instance of unexplainable activity there. On July 25th, Kayla, female 22, closed down the store with one other coworker, and she distinctly recalls everything being in place because it was the closer's job to clean up before leaving. The next morning, Kayla and I were the openers of the cafe. We work in a boba place, by the way. She started freaking out as soon as we got behind the counter because there was a whole pack, 4 rolls of paper towels on the floor. She knows that the night prior, it wasn't there, and the other coworker couldn't have done it because everybody leaves together at night. So somehow something must have moved it overnight. And it's a fairly weighted pack that was left in the dead center of the walkway. I just looked back on my text for the date of the next event. We texted the whole group chat because of how spooked that we were, and just realized it was the same day. It was a very dead work day, slow. Kayla and I were the only ones in the shop. I was doing the dishes, and then I heard the sound of the bathroom door slamming. It was loud. Kayla was behind the counter with me, and we looked at each other and asked her if something was in the bathroom. She was like, "You heard that too?" And so she went to go check, even though we were almost sure no one else was there. You have to walk past the counter to get to the bathroom. We would have seen somebody go by. When she went to check, she knocked on the bathroom. There was no answer, and when she opened the door, there was no one. The motion sensor light was also on before she opened it. The door is pretty heavy, and so it just seems impossible for it to have been the wind or something like that. It doesn't just stay open on its own. We have to use a door stopper to keep it open. The thing is, we don't know if the door was shut and then opened and slammed, or if it was not used that day and the door stopper was just in place before it shut. The door stopper works well, by the way. It's not likely that it moved on its own or gave up on the door. Kayla also heard footsteps that day, But all I know is that she thought it was me, but I wasn't near her at that time. What made me write this post is what happened today. I was again washing the dishes, and also again working with just Kayla. We were closing and doing the end-day cleanup. While I was doing the dishes, I very clearly saw Kayla in my peripheral. Not too far off to the side because it was so clear and I was just looking at the dishes, so it's kind of hard to explain. I saw the cheetah print headscarf that she was wearing today and everything. I saw her turn the corner to go to the back, but I did a double take because the last time I saw her, she was in front of the counter, and I realized it was still in the lobby area. She was there, sweeping. Saw another real estate agent story post. Back some 20 years ago, I had a guy I knew from college that was getting into real estate, and I asked him to show me some homes for experience, and we were actually looking, so win-win. I get to the house but don't see his car, and it's pouring rain. I wait in my car for a few, and after 5 minutes the porch light turned on. I figured he must have drove a different vehicle and parked along the road. I got out and went to the door, but it was locked. I knocked, but no answer, and I was starting to get soaked. Just as I start going back to my car, my friend pulled in. He asked why I was waiting in the rain, and I told him what happened. Halfway through my explanation, the porch light goes back off. We approach the door, knock, and again, no answer. He accessed the key in the agent box, and we go in. We check the switch inside the front, and it's the one for the porch light. And once it was back on, we looked for a sensor. There was none. First off, creepy vibe, and no lights on. As we work from the front to the back, we turn on the lights and turn them back off again on the way to the front. The upstairs is accessed in the front of the home, so when we go up, all downstairs lights are off, except for the front room. We go up, start looking at the rooms, and a knocking starts. 3 at first that make us both give us, "What the fuck did you just hear?" that kind of looks at each other. Then after a bit, 3 more, but louder. We started to nope out of there, and as we got the lights out and headed back downstairs, we heard 3 poundings from the hallway, top of the stairs, now dark but clear in sight. We head for the door quickly, but just as we're getting the key ready for the box, we notice that the light in the very back room is now on again. My friend asked if I want to go with him to shut it off, and I convinced him to leave it on. Seemed very sus, like a trap. And as a grown-ass man, I was feeling a fear that I'm unaccustomed to. As we left, the porch light came back on. Never went back, but have driven by several times. Childhood memory that has stuck with me. When I was about 4 or 5, I was at my grandmother's home. Several stories from there, in parentheses. And it was a rainy spring day. I remember playing in the living room since I couldn't go out, but the front door was open, and the screen and glass exterior door was closed still. I noticed an old man dressed in a black suit and a white shirt, large brimmed hat, standing at the end of the walk facing the door, 30 feet out. I remember he seemed out of place at that time, and it struck me, even at a young age, as being disturbing. I ran to get my grandma because everything about it scared me, and she sensed the terror and ran back to the front door area with me. When I looked down the end of the walk, the man was nowhere to be seen, but chills ran down my spine as my grandmother placed a hand on my shoulder. proceeded to back up slowly and started yelling, "You get out of here!" When I looked up at her, she had a glare in her eyes, locked on the door, and repeatedly yelled, "Get out of here!" while pulling me back. I then looked at the upper half of the door where she was pointing and saw the old man standing, what would have been inches from the glass portion, the upper half of the door. But I had just been inches from the lower half of the screen and I saw nothing. He only appeared in the upper half of the door. My grandmother backed us up to the hallway, and when we got there, she turned quickly and darted us off to the kitchen. I remember this so clearly. There were many other experiences in that home, but that one stands out and has stuck with me my entire life. And that was scary. Is this paranormal? I was watching Sam and Colby when I remembered some weird stuff that happened when I was young. When I was little, I used to wake up and find things that I never had before at the edge of my bed. Some things that I would find are bags of little toys, stuffed animals, and other small things. I didn't think anything of it, since I just thought my mom gave them to me. And the stuffed dog that I still have is very cool. But when I asked my mom about this several years later, she was confused and said that she never did that. We both found it weird, but we both brushed it off as well. Skip to a couple years after that. We moved, and at that time, I didn't have curtains or blinds on my window. I don't know why. So one night I laid down to go to sleep. I was used to car lights going by since we lived near people, and I knew what they looked like. I was laying with my face looking toward the window when all of a sudden, a flashlight. The light of a flashlight turned on. I froze. I pretended to sleep while thinking, what should I do? After like 5 minutes, it didn't go away, so I ran as fast as I could into the living room where my mom was and screamed, "There's a flashlight in my window!" I was screaming while my mom checked and found no flashlight, and then checked outside. No one was there also. I made my mom put up a blanket and I made her lay next to me till I fell asleep. Creepy babysitting experience. When I was 17, I was asked to babysit for a family friend. She has 4 kids, ages 11 to 4. They lived in a really old house, and the 3 girls shared a room together. I babysat really late at night because my mom works night shift at like 8 p.m. to 2 a.m. So I was mainly there to put the kids to sleep and then wait for their mom to come home. Their house always made me feel a little bit uncomfortable. It was old and made a lot of noises. After I put the kids to sleep one night, I went back to the living room, sat on the couch, and was just scrolling on my phone. Their dogs started barking towards the back of the kitchen. I was confused at what they were barking at, so I thought maybe the wind outside was spooking them. It was really windy that night, after all. They stopped barking, but then started to run back and forth down the hallway between the living room and the kids' room. I was trying to calm them down because I didn't want them to wake up the kids. They finally settled down, but I heard the girls scream. The 3 girls share a room. They came running out crying and saying, "The man with red eyes and no arms is back in the closet," the oldest said. "He was staring at us again." I was also scared, so I told the girls to stay in the living room until their mom came home. I realized their little brother, 4 years old, was still sleeping in his room next to the girls' room. I couldn't just leave him by himself, so I told myself I wasn't scared and went to go get him so that way he could be in the living room with all of us. As I was getting him, their dogs started running back and forth again, and I could hear the girls saying, "He's here, he's here!" I got their brother, ran back to the living room, but didn't see anybody except the girls crying. That night, they all fell asleep with the lights on in the living room. The mom was upset at me for not making them sleep in their rooms, so she never asked me to babysit again. I still shudder thinking about that night.